Good evening, everyone, for us in the US, and good morning to our panelists in Australia. It's a great privilege for me as Ron Edwards, the Director of Wine Education for Winebo, to be connected and having a conversation with two awesome people that we love doing business with and love the wines. And we're going to be having a conversation today that revolves around getting to the Caley, but there's so much background information that comes from making great wine. And I want to introduce our two people who are certainly a big influence in this. And we are joined today by Robert Hill-Smith, who took over Yalumba in 1984, and his daughter, Jessica Hill-Smith, who will be taking over in time. And I'm really looking forward to the idea of talking about succession and the love of a family business and how that works with the two of you. So welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Ron. How are you?
I'm well. How are you, Jess?
I'm very good.
Good evening, everybody.
And we have them both on one screen, which is fabulous. And my favorite way to do it. You know, I already mentioned that I'm really looking forward to the interaction between the two of you. And most people who know me at all know I have 5 daughters, and the idea of the specialness of the relationship between father and daughter is really quite unique and wonderful. So I'm joining you from Western Australia, Margaret River, right behind me. It looks like it's a good day out there if you like to die. I'm just kidding, just by pictures. But you know, one can dream, right? And you're at the winery there in, I don't remember what that building was called, but I know I had lunch there.
Yes. A family tasting room, we call it, in the old, part of the old, one of our older buildings where we once had a boiler house, which created the steam to drive our pot still. When we, once upon a time, way back, we made brandy and brandy spirit.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is super helpful, especially if you're going to turn that brandy into port and the like, which you were famous for many, many years. This question is for both of you, and I'd love to hear each person's take on it. As a family and a business, Yalumba has effectively shrunk the globe, which is really cool. Fred Caley Smith shrank the globe through a 635-day journey kind of around the globe. How are each of you doing it now?
You want to start?
Well, as of right now, obviously in 2020, it's a little bit different, isn't it? We've got some limitations, but over the years, Ron, we've greeted. We've got an open house, of course, to friends and loyalists of our Yalumba wines. So a lot of people do come to us, but of course, we are in a way remote in a continent in the Antipodes, and we've had to get on planes and trains, not boats, I have to say, but planes and trains to take ourselves to the world. And so my career has been traveling up to 4 or 5 months a year, including Australia, of course. So really, like Fred Caley Smith, my great uncle, I've got out to the world rather than waited for the world to come to us. And in fact, that early experience of mine in the 1970s, before Australian wine became well known, I think, and respected rather than just a curiosity, was because of a penchant that I had for travel, as do most New Zealanders and Australians for that matter, taking overseas trips or gap years, which you didn't have in my era. It wasn't a privilege of our generation, actually. But that was the trip in 1977, 78 that really opened my eyes to the world and, in a way, the opportunities for Australian wine. And on the other hand, gave me great respect for, we'll call it the European wine world. In that year, I also went to America. I went to California. I landed in New York and went across to California via Chicago, where I was beautifully hosted by a number of nice people in the Napa, particularly Caneros, Napa, And it really just gave me an idea about what the world of wine looked like, and the world of family wine too, to be honest with you. So all of that year and the years since, when I've travelled selling more so than buying, because as you might know, we have an import business as well with the relationships with a lot of, I call them, what we say, respected wine families in Europe, has shaped a lot of the things we've done here at Yalumba and with our estate wine portfolio as well. So, yeah, that's really, in a way, has been we haven't treated the world as our oyster, but certainly it's been a lot easier to access than Fred Caley Smith found. And of course, this year has been a different year all over again, especially with the technology platforms we've been using to reach out to people and educate them about Yalumba and our fine wine, and including the Caley.
Yep.
I better let my daughter say something, Ron. I'll be in trouble.
I was going to moderate and interrupt you there for a second, but I want to come back to the family concept, but she might hit it anyway. Go ahead.
Well, I think when you hear Dad talking about the fact he's been doing this for a long time, talking about his trip in the 70s, when I came along, I think it was finally his chance to say, I've done it. Finally, my daughter is here to sort of take over and help me out. He's getting a bit old for these big overseas trips and months of traveling. So he needed some young family blood to sort of take over. And this is exactly what I've been doing since I joined the business almost 2 years ago. So I turned 30 and joined the family business. And at that point, there was, the need to travel and take our wines and our stories to the world. As Dad said, Australia is a very far away place for lots of people. So to fathom traveling here for some, a 24-hour flight is just a bit too much. So we Australian winemakers have traveled the world and taken our wines everywhere for a long time. It's really just part of the job. And I, just last year would have done 5 overseas trips to New Zealand, Europe, and the States. Mm-hmm. And it's just part of it. And you're traveling with Australian winemakers the whole time. You're bumping into people And I think it's that connection that you build with people when you do go and visit them. I'm always met with, so much excitement because we've come such a long way, and people really respect that we have, taken the time to go and visit them and taken that long journey to, open some bottles of our finest wine for wine lovers around the world. So I absolutely love it. It can be exhausting. I think sometimes it looks a bit glamorous on the outside, where you get to travel around the world and wine and dine and visit beautiful places. But it is exhausting a little bit at the end of the day. But it is, you sort of finish those big trips and feel relieved, but also so grateful that this is part of the wine world, that it's this universal language. You can travel anywhere and open a bottle of wine and have a conversation with people, and that connection you build is immediate. And I think this has probably been the most challenging thing about this year, with the way that we're trying to connect with people. It's a little bit more challenging over a Zoom call to have that same emotional connection and open a bottle of wine and share a glass with people virtually is definitely not the same, but at least we have the option.
Yeah. It's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Great.
In fact, Jessica's first day at work on the payroll was February 19, and we were in Dublin, Ireland. Mm-hmm. So we were. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? The first market she ever worked, and the first day at work was the Irish market out of Dublin, where we were tasting the Caley. In fact, Caley 13, I think. Mm-hmm. Our importers, the Neil Cassidy and his team in Dublin, and doing a little bit of education about Australian wine. So
yeah, if you were going to be in February 19 is not the right date. You could have picked a better time of year for Dublin.
No, it was good. It was good.
Yeah.
And the Guinness was magnificent.
Yeah,
well, there is that for sure.
Any little Irish pub.
So is there a magic behind the number 30 as far as your age, or that just happened to work out that way?
It just happened to work out. I mean, I think I sort of went about my 20s waiting to feel like it was the right time. And I worked for different wine businesses. I traveled. I did work experience in my early 20s, finished uni, first of all, then traveled, did work experience, had some amazing career opportunities in Australia and then in the UK. And I knew that I'd get to a point where I felt really ready to come back to Anguston, where I would no doubt spend the rest of my life. So I had to make sure that, I was ready for that chapter to start. So it ended up that I turned 30 in February last year, and that was, my first day, as Dad says, on the payroll.
Certainly not the first day of work you ever put in for Yalumba, but that's another story altogether.
Absolutely not.
Don't get into labor laws or anything like that.
She started on a different base salary than me as well, I can tell you.
Well, there is the inflation concept. All right, that's awesome. I'm hoping we'll get back to this because I want you to consider in the back of your mind as coming back to the family wineries that you met along the way as you journeyed. And if I can't have you answer now because we've got to move on, but think about one or two that deeply affected you as to what, I want to, that's my aspiration there, but can't do that now, but think about it for a second. I want to actually go to this question. And that is, from the outside looking in, I see, as someone who's visited you, interacted with your team, that Yalumba values and works to build team, capital T, capital E, capital A, capital M. Robert, you built the team, at least the one I know of, right? I'd love to hear your perspective on building a team that is then capable of creating any kind of offering called a pinnacle, which is what the Caley is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think, there's been a lot of books written about all this sort of thing, Ron, as everyone would respect. So there's no sort of secret magic apart from it being real. I think that's the whole thing. Rather than being a theory, it's got to be real. And when I came into the family winery in the 70s, there was already obviously a culture in place. We live in the country. There's there is a network of families that that have worked, that live in the townships and have worked in either growers of grapes that supply us or worked in our own winery. So there's a very communal base for a start, which I grew up respecting. And I think what I understood when I came in with a little more responsibility was that culture wasn't an accident. It was actually something that had to be respected on one hand, or acknowledged on one hand and respected, and then built on. So you can't take a team-based morale, team-based culture for granted. You actually have to be aware of it and work on it rather than expect it to have its own continual sustained momentum. So our philosophies, I don't think, are any different from other good, multi-generational family businesses. I think you treat everybody equally. My attitude's always been to have an open door policy, a very flat management structure, and to communicate with people regularly and honestly. I suppose part of our culture has been firm but fair and being consistent in the way things are managed, any issues are managed, so people don't have to second guess. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I think it's about being normal and having a good radar, to be frank with you. My father always said, it's all about common sense. You don't need to be a professor to do a lot of these things. You just have to have a good, street education and a respect for people. And that's what we've always had in our informal charter. We don't have mantras pasted all over the winery or in our front office. We actually live the culture rather than put posters up around the place telling people what it is. So, you judge by your actions rather than what you write and what you say you will do. Rather, you judge by what you do. So we try and stay close to our people. We keep it honest. We try and make it fun. We as we used to say, less so now. We work hard, we play hard.
That's
and
still a little bit true.
You know where the switch is off and on, in that regard. But, I think the fairness factor is a really important thing, and treating everybody as being special, but being open and honest about it all. So, I suppose outside looking in, I acknowledge that a lot of people pick up on this, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
Guaranteed success. On the other hand, anyway, we do keep people. I think that's one of the things we try. I think one of the things we recruit slowly, and some people say, "Oh God, that person's been here for 15 years or 20 years." We say, "Yes, that's great." We acknowledge our growers. We have inside our clock tower a board that acknowledges not only our own people who've been here more than 21 years, but also our grape growers who've supplied us for more than 21 years. And there are a lot of them, to be honest. So that's a nice index of mutual respect, I think.
Awesome. And yes, people have written books all about it, but they're still writing books about it because that means people haven't really figured it out completely yet. And it's great. I love that commentary on it. Sensible, just plain sensible. Because it does appear that you keep employees around a long time. And for that to happen, they have to be happy. They have to feel valued. And so that's part of building a team. Jess, let's come to you because you alluded to something that I think is super important for people looking into a multi-generational business. I'm just going to put it out there. It's easy for them to say, well, they were born with it. They didn't have to work with it. Sometimes even as ugly as what do they know? And I want you to be able to tell some of your story because I respect that you left. So yes, you have some great experience in the luxury wine brand market, right? I'm interested in your take on why Yalumba can be a luxury brand and a Thursday night option at the same time. And while you're telling me that, go ahead and tell people, I didn't just stay in Anguston. I went out and I found I could have stayed out and came back.
Yeah. Well, Dad's just reminded me I left home at 14. I went to boarding school. So I did leave home, Anguston, quite early on. But this is, Anguston is where I grew up. The winery is where I grew up. And I think what is different generationally is that Dad's era, your generation, it was very normal to just go straight into your family business. There wasn't this sort of idea that you should go work for somebody else before you came back. It was sort of, that was how things went. Your dad was running the business and you were next, and that's just how it went. And when we were growing up, there was certainly never any pressure on myself or my two sisters from mum and dad to come and join you. But by osmosis, this is where we grew up. This is where we spent our weekends running around the winery and being totally immersed in everything that went on here. But I think after Dad had sort of spoken to a few other family wine businesses about how they brought their next generation in, it was becoming very normal to encourage the next generation to go and experience something else, to make sure that when they came back to the business, they were coming in a position of expertise and, I guess, confidence, having earned and being seen to have earned your right to be there. So to be put on a level playing field where if I was anybody that was applying for the job, I was as eligible to get that job as anybody else. And I think that was really important. And I think that's quite normal now for other family wine businesses, and friends of mine have behaved in a very similar way. So I remember this, and Dad, I wonder if you remember. I was sort of had my first job as a marketing coordinator in Adelaide after finishing uni. And I was sort of contemplating my next steps and how I might sort of make my first steps into the wine world. And you said to me, we sat at You Are Coffee, and you said, I think you should do a vintage. Yes. And I think you should do it away from Australia. Go away from Yalumba, where you're not being watched by everybody and your every move is not being tracked. And you can go and discover what parts of the wine world you enjoy. So then when you come back, you are you know where you want to go. So I took that advice and I did my vintage in a winery in New Zealand at Nautilus in Marlborough, and had the most amazing experience. And I think that was really my first step into feeling like I belonged in this wine world. And it just kickstarted the next couple of years where I did work experience for different businesses around the world. I did some work experience with Wine Australia in the US. I distributed in the UK, Negociants. I did some work with them. And, it really just opened my eyes to this amazing world of wine and made it a little bit less intimidating than I thought it was before. Dad's pointing to something. Do you want to add something?
Your first job was with a coffee franchise.
Yeah.
Your job
I was a marketing coordinator.
Cibo Espresso.
Sure.
And that was a good start from flavour as well, understanding flavour and the commercial realities of a very young but quick-growing, high-class coffee franchise in South Australia. And she went from barista to marketing coordinator, which was a good transition. But, I just, as I say, a lot of people say, isn't it interesting that, you changed the rules for the family? I think hindsight's a good thing, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And we have a rule now that family can't join the business until they have actually got a professional qualification or in tertiary education course, and they do at least 5 years in a business outside of the family business, and then they come in, apply for a job when a job is available that suits their skill base. So.
And I'm the oldest in the family, so with all these new rules or changes or charters, I'm the guinea pig for them. So my sisters just follow in my footsteps, follow my lead. But Ron, you asked about my experience in luxury specifically. And after this sort of year of travel and work experience and sort of finding which part of the wine world I felt like I connected to, I came back to Australia and applied for a job at Moet Hennessy. And sat at the beach all summer sort of preparing for my interview. I was so nervous for it and just really, really wanted this job. And I was so lucky to have got the job at Moet Hennessy. I worked on Moet Chandon and Dom Perignon as my first job as a marketing assistant. And that really, I can't tell you how much that boosted my confidence. I thought, wow, I've my travels over the last year have meant something. And I've got this dream job with some of the best champagne brands in the world. And that for me, I think, cemented where I wanted to go. I loved marketing. I loved being a part of the brand strategy. And I think that working on brands like Ruinart and Krug and Dom Perignon have such clear brand identities that I really loved that side of marketing and wine. So that sort of set me up for the next couple of years, and I loved my time there. But Dad is trying to tell me to wrap it up. I think you want to
keep going. That's your fine.
But in terms of luxury and how I feel like that fits in with Yalumba, I mean, obviously we have quite a broad portfolio where you can choose to drink at any level, any night of the week. But I think where luxury can fit into a Thursday night, I think so many people wait for the right moment to open that special bottle, whereas I'm a firm believer in you can create the moment by just opening that bottle. And that can be a Monday, a Tuesday, a Saturday. It can be a 30th birthday, a 70th birthday. It's the moment is created when you open it. And I certainly experienced that firsthand with some of the luxury brands I worked on, and taking a beautiful bottle of champagne to a BYO restaurant and opening it just created a really memorable night. So I'll take that away as a lesson that you can do well and create a memory whenever you want.
Yeah, I think that's so very true.
Aspiration.
Yeah, the other factor in the moment and the great bottle of wine or the Thursday night wine, what makes that moment is who you're sharing it with.
Yeah.
A great bottle of wine sitting by yourself is like catching the big fish of your life with nobody to brag to. I mean, it's just not any fun.
Or that wave behind you.
Yeah, or that wave behind me, exactly. Which, no, I don't even paddle out and anything looks like that because that's a long
The
way.
other one, Ron,
About
would be
25.
a hole in one with no one to see it.
That's exactly right. So that gives us a little context. I sort of combined two questions there for you because it really seemed like your Fred Caley tour was actually a professional tour. It wasn't an explorative tour. You went out and found things that would add value. And my perspective, as the father of 5 daughters, the father pushing you out of the nest and saying, go out, become a professional so that you're not only a professional in your own right, you have your own self-confidence, but you know you belong here. And you know that if I applied for this job, I would be qualified. And so you don't have to worry about what people think on the outside. I think that's beautiful. And I think it's very smart. And I think
you think you're protecting me.
I think it builds into the idea of trying to do great things. Great things are not easy, and good often gets in the way of great. So let's talk about, and this is for both of you to bounce back and forth. I really love the summation of the Caley 2015 as the pinnacle of 171 years. I think that's an amazing statement. Collective experience is the most obvious advantage packed within the statement of 171 years because you have surprising little advantages that emerge, which lead to a wine as regal as the Caley. And so kind of give me an idea of the small little advantages that come from that legacy of time that give you the ability to make a wine like this. And I mean, in reality, is it gives you the ability to make all the wines you make, but especially this
one. Well, I think when you talk about luxury brand marketing and it's linked to where Yalumba, the path Yalumba is on, we're hardly going to forget our roots, which are making high quality wine at accessible, we'll call it accessible pricing levels that reflect variety and region and vintage, of course. But there's a view I don't think anyone would disagree with that over the years, over the 71 years this year. But there's a certain degree of modesty that comes with that sustained survival, and we've never really pushed ourselves to the limit in terms of creating a wine or wines that we feel fit into the elite class, and felt honestly with a new generation coming in, and admittedly the first Caley was 2012, released in 2017 as a 5-year-old wine, and a mature wine, but with longevity at its core. But it's really, we felt that it's about time with our wisdom, we'll call it, and our provenance, both in winemaking and in the heritage of our vineyards, that we could, at the right time, create something very special that was both authentically Yalumba on one hand and authentically Australian on the other. And that plays to a theme that runs through our offering, which is Cabernet Shiraz blending. And the variation to that blend is, of course, on Australian soil, is that we can blend across regions without it being in breach of any law, either wine or labelling law, etc. So some of the greatest Australian wines have been, in our view, cross-regional blends, and in this case, pointing to the Caley Cabernet Sauvignon from Coonawarra, which is, along with Margaret River, our Cabernet temple in Australia, a la Bordeaux, and then blending that with Shiraz from the Barossa, which is, of course, the Hermitage of the equivalent of the Hermitage in France. So the best of two, the two hero varietals, and they do work well together. And we've got history going back into the 19th century that shows the innovation happening in that space. But really wanted to push the boundaries in terms of not only winemaking, because we've made Cab Shiraz blends for, 140 years that we know of, but putting ourselves up into the higher coterie, we'll call it, of an Australian wine offering for the first time. So in that sense, it's been 171 years in the making. Having the courage, on the other hand, has been rather new to say this is a wine what we think plays to our strongest, our strongest chord, and at the same time respects our history, both country, as a state, and as a winemaker. But we didn't do it just because it was an idea we had sitting around the table. We in the end, it was because of the harvest, the quality of the wines in that harvest year gave us so many options. That was the year to explore the opportunity. So that's really the base of the birthing of the Caley in 2012.
Yeah. So Jess,
sorry, Ron, what was that?
No, I was just going to say, and Jess, do you want to point to any significant advantages that all that time up front before you launched a luxury brand, so to speak?
Mm-hmm. I think that a big part of the Caley is the story behind Fred Caley Smith, the man. Mm-hmm. And we talk a lot about him and his travels and his story. And if we weren't a family-owned business, that story may have been lost. It may, all his letters that he had written home to his father, if someone else had bought our business and found a box of letters, it would have had no meaning to them. It would have been thrown in the bin. So the fact that we have this huge chunk of history that we can attribute to this, the pinnacle of our collection, I think adds so much weight to the meaning of the wine. And I think when you're talking about luxury, it has to evoke something more than just being a great glass of wine. You have to evoke emotion and meaning and have something more to bring to the table. And I think the history of Yalumba, you can really talk to the Caley and pick up that and tell the history of Australian wine with Fred's journey in 1893, our history with Cabernet Shiraz, where those vine cuttings came from. All of this history is wound up in one historic bottle. So I think that's such a big part of why the wine has so much meaning, and that's a huge, I think, little advantage that has emerged from, the continual family ownership.
Yeah. I see some other things, and those are important stories. And I believe that at the heart of it, that's sort of the culmination of some other things that, from an outsider looking in, the advantage of time and stability gives you some other really cool things too, like the right grower relationships and knowing which property is the best to buy after a long period of research, and having the stable financial backing of 171 years to be able to experiment with something that, if it fails, it won't end the winery. It'll be a bruise and you won't like it very much, but you could survive, right? And then trusting your vision, like what you just talked about, is like, we trust our vision because we've been using our vision for six generations, and it turns out better most of the time. I think that's really, really cool. That one of the things I love about Yalumba, before I go to the next prompt, is I love that you are allowing yourselves to be big by some people's comparison, but not as big as many wineries, and better at the same time. And that bears its mark for me as a professional taster at every level of your offering. And I will just tell the audience that my experience tasting the Caley for the first time was really impactful. And I'll point you to a tasting note that I did by video so that people could find out what it tastes like from somebody other than the winery at the end of the webinar. So now we're going to get a little personal before we actually talk a little bit more about the facts and figures maybe of the Caley that help people understand why they should go buy it. As I told you earlier, Robert, I'm the father of 5 daughters, and I know firsthand the uniqueness of that relationship, all of them. You have 3, right? The range of emotions, the wish to mentor, the desire for success, the desire for their life experience of joy and fulfillment, and all the other stuff that doesn't sound as much fun that I'm not going to talk about. In this context, would you be kind enough to talk us through the journey that you're experiencing of transitioning from leader to daughter? Because I think there's a lot of heartfelt
Well, it's a bit like parenting. It's a continual learning curve, isn't it, Ron?
Yes.
I've got a lot of throwaway lines about this that probably aren't appropriate, but having 3 daughters coming off a family reality where I think the last daughter born of a family member of family at Yalumba was in the pre-1920.
Wow.
Jessica being born in 1986. 89, sorry, 89. Marriage that was another important event. 89 was a bit of a shock to the system, as I say. 3 daughters weren't the plan. It's just the way it's turned out, but it's been a good result. I think the important thing, Ron, in this transitioning is to let Jess find her own feet and go at her own speed, and at the same time be available as I am to offer advice when it's required. Otherwise, I think it's builds a bit more resilience, knowing that she's got to find her own way through the labyrinth of issues that family deal with every day. So she's doing that well, and we're all thrilled to have her, as are the Yalumba team. I think that's the other thing that's, I think, important and heartwarming, if I must use that word, is that the Yalumba team at large love the fact that we have another family member at the winery, and she's at the tasting bench, she's at the crushing pit, she's in the vineyard, and she's in the marketplace as well. So it's not ceremonial; it's ground level, and it's real. So I just keep reminding her that everything she does is being watched, not by me, but by the world. So it's not that much fun when you realise that, but it becomes something you just simply get used to. But it's to go to work and say, walk around the corner and say hello to your daughter for a change, rather than hello to all the other members. It's nice to have your own family on board. So again, we'll manage it as at the speed that she wishes it to travel. Experiences she wishes to have.
Jess, you want to add anything?
I think they like having someone around that can tell Dad off every now and then and put him in place a little bit more and humanize him.
Oh, very good.
And tick him off, because he's sometimes not so easy to work with, and I can balance that all out. But I think such a big part of, you asked if there was a reason 30 was the number that I came back here at, but in the back of my mind as well was I don't want to miss out on the opportunity to work alongside my dad. So while you're still active in the business, you're not golfing every day and kicking your feet up and relaxing at the beach. While you're still here, impart your wisdom. I didn't want to miss out on that chance, so I did.
First time I've been told I possess any wisdom. That's nice.
I did want to make sure I was here for that.
Yes, and it's being recorded, so you can listen to it over and over again on those low moments when you have her having a conflict over something. Well, that's wonderful. Let's as much as I'd love to dwell in that moment, because I want so much for people to feel, having met you, that's how I felt when I met you at the winery. It was like, this is real. This is not marketing. This is just real. So thank you for giving us that vision for the moment. Now let's talk about the Caley facts and figures and such like that. So Coonawarra, and it's Barossa and Eden Valley blend, Shiraz from Barossa and Eden Valley. So Jess, you want to pick up the Coonawarra story of that particular block and how it came to be? And
Well, you might be better to speak to it, because you bought the vineyard in 93. But I believe that we had been buying fruit from this vineyard for a long time before that and blending it with our Barossa Shiraz. So there was a long history of Yalumba buying fruit from this vineyard from the Redmonds. Is that right?
Thompsons.
And and blending it. So when the opportunity came up for Dad to purchase this vineyard, it was an opportunity to own a vineyard on that famous Terra Rossa soil in Coonawarra, on the inner sanctum. And it was an offer you couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
Benefit of 100 years right there.
Yeah, well, that was the first estate we've owned in Coonawarra, and it's a region that I've always respected. I didn't probably understand the risks involved down there viticulturally, which is normal, I suppose. But we have got ourselves a good piece of dirt. We've got some exciting clones that have been introduced to Australia, Cabernet clones for the first time. Anyway, what we've done over those years is to isolate the best sites within the estate. And as it turned out, the site we chose off the tasting bench, not in the vineyard itself, but off the tasting bench and then tracked it back to the vineyard, was what we call the D block, or the Ming D block, which is a longer story why it's called Ming, but nothing to do with the Ming dynasty. The nickname of our Prime Minister, in fact, ex-Prime Minister, was his nickname. But Block D, and that is the block we now would say curate, manage as the source block for the Cabernet in the Caley. It is managed a bit more hand managed, we'll call it, than the rest of the vineyard site, which it's norm for us to break all of our estates up into small sites and manage them independently. They all behave differently, and we like to give them that chance to express themselves accordingly. Okay. So the Barossa side is a little bit different in the sense that we've got a greater repertoire of choices. So you can talk to that, Jess, in terms of the...
Sure, and then we come back to the Barossa for the two Shiraz blocks, and one very old site planted in 1901 has formed the base of the Shiraz component for the 2015. And this is a tiny block of 8 rows of vines planted in 1901, owned by the Burgermeister family, who have been growers for Yalumba for, I think, over 4 generations. And this has been a long-standing relationship between Yalumba and the Burgermeisters. They've told us stories of delivering grapes to Yalumba by horse and cart. So it sort of paints a picture.
I was here then. I was here.
That's how old he is. It paints a picture about how long this has been going on. And when you think about the Barossa, that multi-generational story goes across winemakers and grape growers. And it's a huge part of the community here. So that's a beautiful old block that has made its way into the Caley 2015. And the second component is a smaller component from Eden Valley, which we have called our Yalumba Horseshoe Block, which exists just behind us here. It was planted by my grandma in 1971. And she planted this vineyard called the Horseshoe Block because of the shape of the contours that the vineyard follows along the hill. So those 3 core components are the sort of consistent blocks that we have used for all 4 releases. There's been some differing Shiraz blocks in different years, but I think that's the advantage of having the flexibility to just select the best fruit in any year. But certainly this Burgermeister 1901 block and the Horseshoe block has been a consistent story throughout the Caley.
Yeah, and the Horseshoe block, just to connect the story a little bit more, is wrapped around the Fred Caley shed, if I'm not mistaken, which is remarkably appropriate.
Mm-hmm. In 2020, I tasted, I think, a month ago, the 2020 off that block. It is just one of the, I have to say, as a single wine, as a single ferment barrel, it is one of the great wines I've ever tasted, but it'll go into the Caley. But on its own, it's pure gold.
Maybe you can convince somebody to put a couple of bottles of just that for you. I mean, you do have to.
Good idea, but I think we've blended.
And I just wanted from the technical sommelier tasting perspective, which is I think it's a little easier for me to talk about flavor and quality. And I mean, you certainly stand behind it, but a third party never hurts, right? So I tasted it. And one of the things I want to reinforce with the audience is how balanced this wine is. This is a wine that tops out at 14% alcohol, which is what we should be expecting in general from Australia. No matter what anybody told you, they're not all the same. It's a continent, it's a huge place. So, and even in Barossa and Eden, that's not all the same. It varies. But when you take Coonawarra, which is a significantly different climate than Barossa, and you put it together, you're going to end up with more balance. And not only is it 14% alcohol, but it's also 3.49 pH. So you're talking about the acid balance of Europe, not the acid balance of California. So when this wine hits you, the aroma profile is intense and beautiful and rich, but the flavor profile is deft and lighter than you think it's going to be, and really balanced. It's a beautiful work, a little bottled art. All the effort shows through in every sip. And I tasted it over 36 hours just to watch it evolve, and it only got better. So the wine has plenty of time if you're a cellar hog. If you are like me and you're not sure how long life will be, then just make sure you open it with somebody you love and a good meal, and sit and relax for a while. The wine is fabulous. That tasting note that I'm referring to is on Winebo's YouTube channel under a playlist called, don't laugh, it's meant to be a little cheesy, Tasty Expectations. And so all of the tasting notes in there are me tasting one of our portfolio wines and giving people some sort of expectation. If they've opened this bottle, what would they get other than the tasting note at the winery? I haven't gotten any questions, but I did get a statement which is sort of reflective of many things you said today. And that was from a gentleman named Jim Dupree, who visited Yalumba 25 years ago because of his love of the Clock Tower port. He was visiting, and if I'm reading it correctly, he was just being kind about his love of the port, and he was invited into the founder's office as a result, and just got that really unique personal experience that you talk about, being open and honest with people, and still remembers it to this day enough to be on this webinar listening to you today and telling me about it, even though it wasn't really a question. If there are any questions, now's the time. They've done a really great job of answering a lot of questions without it being asked. I'll give you a couple of seconds while the two of you have any parting comments for us.
The other little bit of this story, I mean, everything wraps back. It's kind of, the Caley itself is we talk back to my time in Bordeaux in 78. I did a vintage in Bordeaux in 78. We came close to the Barton family, whose wines we started importing from Langlois and Layerville. And then the interesting other part of all this is that we have tried to track some of the clonal history of the clones planted in the Coonawarra vineyard of ours at Ming D block, and in other blocks or sites, on our estate. But there is a strong belief that with one of the early cuttings, Cabernet cuttings that were imported by the MacArthur family into the botanical gardens here, that we took our own cuttings from eventually in South Australia, can be linked back to Bordeaux, to the Bartons, and the time when they established and I was really a little bit unaware of this, the Irish impact, or the impact of the Irish on the winemaking fraternity in Bordeaux. Mm-hmm. And there's a history that Ferrari told me about called the wine geese. And these were the nickname for the Irish families who fled Ireland in the 18th century and went to France and stayed and got into winemaking. The Bartons and the Lynches of Lynch-Barge and others were part of all that history. And so you're tying our own personal relationships in Bordeaux into vines that we have a reasonable confidence about. We've got planted out, tying right, and they're used in the Caley blend to tie back to those relationships and that European, Australian family history. It's bizarre.
That's amazing.
The thing around the Caley in our winery, of course, Ron, is our own cooperage where we import staves from the forests in France and put the barriques together here with our own master coopers at the winery. We're the only Southern Hemisphere winery with our own on-site winery cooperage, which is gives us our own little, I think, tangible DNA in what Yalumba does and how Yalumba do things in our red wine.
And walking in the room smells amazing.
It does.
Walk in the barrel room. I do have a couple of questions. That's leading to one of them. And the other is a simple question. So I think it basically is the rare and fine collection, but one of the people on the questions asked for name the best wines and then wanted pictures of bottles, which we can find all those pictures at yalumba.com. So Jessica, where do you want to point them so they can say, these are our best wines? Look in this section. Not that you can't play favorites with your children, but they did ask for the best.
So if they were going to our Yalumba website, you can filter it by collection, and you'd filter it to the rare and fine collection, which is the best of what we do. So that is a wine called the Signature, the Caley, the Menzies, the Octavius, the Virgilius, our Viognier, and a Tricentenary Grenache. So there's 6 wines in that collection that form the top of what we can do.
Fabulous. And then the other question was a short sort of description of how the wine is made. And so I'll start it off with the concept that basically the Caley is made, for lack of a better description, of making a winery within a winery. It's all very singular kind of decision making. So we already know you make all the barrels for it. We've covered that. And so what's next?
Well, it's really, as we say, as you've already taken my line, Ron, a little winery within the winery, which plays to our mantra of Yalumba never being too big to do the little things brilliantly. And, that's the focus. So this is obviously hand-picked, the Cabernet from Coonawarra and all the Shiraz components are hand-picked. They are fermented individually, not co-fermented, I should say. So we don't make those decisions. So they're bought in, they are pressed, basket pressed to the small open top, not concrete, but foudre fermenters, and plunged daily until the wild ferments, so they're not inoculated. We may use a cultured yeast to finish the ferment if we have to, but ultimately these wines wild ferment in the winery just to my left. And when obviously that's done, they are racked and taken to barrel individually still, and probably around July. So that's happening. Now we're picking between late Feb for Shiraz and late March into April for Cabernet, because it's further south and cooler for the Cabernet. And we'll be making those decisions about which components of those ferments are suitable for Caley, allocation against the Caley, sometime usually in about July when we do our classifications. So at that point, we'll make a decision and play with blends, because it's not prescriptive. It plays to the vintage personality and challenge this year and other years for that matter. But we'll then blend and put them back to barrel as the Caley and monitor it for the next, probably up to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We bottle under cork and mature in glass for 2 to 3 years before we bring to market. Mm-hmm. So it's a small winemaker. I think that's the important thing. Even though I tell people, and you guys would know, that some of the Grand Crus of Bordeaux, can be between 15 and 25,000 dozen. Mm-hmm. This winemaker is minute by comparison, and to date has been between 300 and 500 dozen. Is a winemaker. That's it. So next year, this year might even be less. But so it's a really crafted, closely monitored, closely tended right through its life. And as it should be, it's special.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things I was hoping would come up. And it's always a sensitive point to bring up how many cases are available of something. But when I said, okay, what's the retail price? And then I was comparing it with the quality that I have to that if I want that somewhere else, Cru Class Bordeaux, Top Flight California, wherever I'm going, how much are they making? And I was immediately struck by the exact comparison that you were talking about. We want to look at the price of second growth Bordeaux, and none of those properties make less than tens of thousands of cases of wine. So yes, this is a very small, heartfelt, artisan, technically correct project, and it's really amazing. That's the end of our questions. And I know you have work to do today somewhere. At least I hope you do. Although I hate to send you off to work, because we're going to go home and relax now. It's a weird thing about the time delay.
You deserve it.
I reiterate, such a pleasure chatting with you. I hope this isn't the last time, and certainly I hope it's in person one of these times. And be well and be safe and be successful. And we love having your wines in our portfolio, and we look forward to drinking them and selling them. So
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks, Ron. Thank you, Winebo, and good luck.
Yes. Good luck with the Caley. It doesn't take luck. All they have to do is taste it. It's amazing. It's amazing.
And the signature.
And that. Yes. Well, all of them, really.
All the best anyway. Thank you for your time. We've enjoyed it.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Bye.
Cheers.
See ya.